Okay, hi everybody. Sorry I messed up the first one. Forgot I had turned the audio off from a recording I did for the conference. So let's try this again. Yes, this time without the oops. So video on, and let's go through these top 10 tips again. So the first thing is redraw or trace. So if you worked out your solution on paper, then you really have those two options. Either you're going to redraw the whole thing in AutoCAD, minus the base information, which is already there, which means you're going to have to locate your high point swale, low point swale, make sure you take some measurements and get those exactly where they're supposed to be, and then double check the lines. Uh, you could also scan your image in, as you've done in the past, and then bring that into AutoCAD and use that to trace over. And what may be the best is kind of a combination between the two, so you can kind of make your drawing a little more accurate from the sketch as you put that in. The key thing is here, and I'll mention this when I jump over to AutoCAD for a second, is to make sure that your numbers match your graphics. So if you scan something in and you don't scale it right, and then you just trace it and you trace the contours without checking to make sure that the slope is the distance of the center line is the same, so that if you check it and calculate based on the high point or low point, which we will do when we grade your projects, it needs to work out to the same slope that you have written on your drawing. Also in contour spacing, if your scanned image isn't correct in terms of scale and you just start tracing the contours, the measurements may be off for the spacing on those too. So either way you do it is fine. Just make sure you either get the exact same numbers and spacing and scale if you scan it, or if you're going to redraw it, then make sure you may have to redo a couple calculations. And as you'll see, as we get down through the list a little bit, if you have to shift your contours, it's no big deal. We can do that really quickly in AutoCAD. So just make sure the numbers and the graphics match. Now, if you want to bring a drawing in, remember, we can go to the Insert tab. We can just do an attach. I've got an image that was just a printout of the original drawing. It's not a sketch, but I can uncheck the specify on screen. Insertion point, I will specify on the screen. Just going to bring that in, click, and there's my drawing. Now, I don't really know what scale I drew this at, but let's just say I definitely want to double check this either way, even if you think this is scanned at 20 scale and everything's perfect. So we can scale that really easily using that reference method. So I'm going to select my object. I like to use the right-click method. You can type in scale if you like. Specify base point. And for this, I will have the object snaps on. But once I go from here, turn my object snap off, I'm going to right click and choose reference, or type reference down here in the command line. And now I'm going to zoom in. One thing I need to do, I didn't check this ahead of time, so I will do this. Before I do this, let me cancel out. I'm going to jump over to our base project. If I'm using the reference points, I need to know what that exact dimension is. And since you have the project file, you can go use the measure tool and turn my object snaps back on. I'm going to click here, here. Now, if you're getting this to 30 and 13/16, another thing I might want to do is just go in here and format units. Just say precision to the nearest inch. That will make things a little bit easier. So let's check that again. Click here, and distance is 30 foot 1 inch. Okay, so that's my measurement. Now if I go back to my other drawing, let's do this again. Select my image, choose scale, set my base point, and now I'm going to right click, choose reference, and at this point you want to turn your any kind of ortho snap or your O snaps off, because I don't want to snap to the edges of this image. I want to make sure I come in here, and since the line weights are displaying, I'm going to take a point right in the center of that. So there's the reference length. Try and make it as parallel as you can, and there's center of the other one, and specify the new length is 30 feet 1 inch. And now let's zoom out a little bit. And you can see it has rescaled that. If I come back in here with my measurement tool again, do the same thing. I won't get exactly the same points, but I'm going to click there, they're 30 foot 1 and 13/16 inch. So again, if I change my units, step that down, I'm where I should be. So just make sure if you're going to bring in a scanned image that you do scale that. And then also, if you want to double check, if you had, if you actually had swale center lines drawn in here, you can also use the measure tool to check distances. And see if I can do this again. If I mark one point, go down here. Now I can right click and choose multiple points, because then I could just go over, you could carefully trace over a hand-drawn, and then when you're done, hit enter, distance, and it's going to give you a total distance of 153 feet, 8 inches and 5/16. So there's no line there, I just did a trace, but you could use your measurement tool with multiple points in order to double check those hand-drawn lines that you have in the original. So anyway, the key is, if you've got a high point swale somewhere, you can measure it off the house from a couple corners and then triangulate it, or just locate it the closest you can and then just remeasure it, as you'll see me demonstrate in a little bit, and just make sure it matches. Okay, but you don't have to use a scanned image if you don't want to. You can just locate those and redraw them. Okay. All right, let's zoom back out here. I'm going to get this out of here for right now. All right, so that's the first issue you can deal with, and you may have already gotten past that point. Textiles, again, just a reminder, we talked about this last semester. I went in here under annotate, and I actually set up, you can click on the pop up the textile dialog using that little icon there. And I created a new spile elevation in model space. It's 1 foot 6 inches. But again, you want to check that to make sure that you have a good hierarchy of text size in your document. You all should know how to figure that out. And once you set that, specify it as a scale. Just use an Arial font, some sans serif font. And then once you do that, you can apply that to the text that you use for your spile elevations. You might want another one for the contour labels. You might want another textile for your legend. And title block information, however many you need, but it's always a good idea to set up the textiles, because then you can change those a little bit more easily, and you're going to maintain consistency between those things. So remember, just use that. Okay, spot elevation marks or symbols, create those as a block. Just be sure to use layer 0. So here's my spot elevation symbol. If I right click on that and choose the block editor, you can see here, I select that line, go to my home tab, my layer is displaying that it's on layer 0. And of course, what that means is when I place this anywhere, it's going to pick up the attributes. So right now it's on the spots layer, and I can go into that layer down here, and I can set the line weight based on the layer. And that's the best way to do all your line weights. I think I mentioned that later on too. But when you create the block, make sure that you keep those lines on layer 0, and then create a layer for the spot elevations and assign the line weight based on that. Now, kind of related to that, the problem with that, of course, is what you get is that little plus, but the spot elevation consists of the symbol plus the text for the elevation. But you can't really put that text in the block itself, because then it would be the same text, and if you edit it in one place, it would edit it everywhere. So what you want to do is set up that kind of text object, and then instead of putting it as part of the block, what I'd suggest doing is, let me make a copy of this right now. Okay, I'm going to move this over here. I'm going to make a copy of this. I'm going to place that about there. So now I'm going to stretch this out so it fits a little better. And then I'm going to reset this text to 000.00. Now, you might, this has LPS in it. You could do a different one that creates another group with the same spot symbol block, and then just get rid of these letters. The key thing is here, you don't want to actually leave real numbers in here, because if you do that and start copying it and moving it around, you will forget to change one of them, and we'll look at your drawing and realize you've got like 4 spot elevations that are all exactly the same, and they can't be. So it's a lot better idea to do this. And then when you make copies to place them around, you know if you see 0, 0, 0.00, you haven't completed that elevation yet. Only the ones with real numbers are the ones you will have edited. So in order to take this whole thing, then I can select that and come up here in my Home tab and just choose Group. Now, that creates a group, but you can see right now when I click on a piece of this, it's only still selecting the part, and that's because I haven't toggled on the group selection option. If I turn that on and click on this, now I can move that around as a group. I can copy that as a group, and put that around wherever I need it. But if I toggle that off, now I can come in here and just select that text and put in whatever elevation I want. So that's we didn't really talk about groups too much last semester, but I find that to be a really useful way of kind of combining something with a block that you want to be able to have some flexibility and edit the pieces individually. Just remember to toggle this off and on, and that will allow you to either select the group itself, or if you turn it off, it allows you to select any object within the group. Okay, layers. I mentioned this before. Just make sure you do set up layers for, and I think if we switch over to here, there's already some layers in the original drawing, existing contours, contour labels, driveway, deck, front porch, etc. So based on, what line weights you choose to use, these obviously have line weights set up, but you may want to change them around to make things work a little bit better once you start picking font sizes and determine what your proposed information is going to look like in terms of line weight. You also can go back in and deal with kind of half-toning issues, which I think I mentioned somewhere down in here. Plot styles. Yeah, I'm going to get to that right next. So if you have everything set up by layers, all attributes by layers, then you can really easily go in and half-tone down that existing information so that that reads lighter on your final output, a plot or PDF, than the proposed contours and information. And you do that by, we just go in here. We're going to click on our Layout tab, and I will right-click and choose the Page Setup Manager. And whatever layout you're on will be selected. Click Modify. And normally you want to have this monochrome.ctb, check Displace Plot Styles, and then just click on the little tool settings icon. And I have a vague recollection that color 40 was one of those contours, so I'll give that a shot. Yeah, actually in here, I already have this set to screening of 50%. So if I set this back to 100, to show you what it looks like, click Save and Close. Okay, close. Now to get that to kind of display correctly, I'm going to double click and activate this, do a RE for regen, double click outside. Now if I come back in here, let's go back in, Page Setup Manager. Well, let's just double check that to make sure that, yeah, that's not the right color. Okay, existing contours 1, click on that. That is color 56. So let's change that. That's the 1 foot contours there. So let's go here to Page Setup Manager, Modify, click on the settings. Let's go down to 56. That's at 100%. Let's set it down to 40% screening. Everything else stays the same. Save and close. Okay, close. Again, right now, it doesn't look any different. Activate the viewport, do an RE for regen, double click outside, and now you can see those lines are nice half-toned value. It's much better to do it that way than actually assign a gray to it because the output printer driver will decide what that gray is. And sometimes it's based on the color or that gray value. It's not exactly accurate. So I like to use the screening setting because then 30, 40, 50%, you know exactly what the difference between those different values of gray are if you want to use a couple different ones. Let's see, kind of related to that, kind of relates to the contour lines a little bit anyway, but let's Well, we'll hold off on that. We'll get to that. We'll talk about the dash lines and the settings to make sure you get your dashes both displaying right and the size that you want and consistent between model space and paper space. So let's take a look at the O snaps and spots. Let's jump back to our sample drawing here. We mentioned this in lecture, Stuart talked about it, but make sure you don't snap this to the corner of your building. You want to make sure there's an offset there because that gets confusing. It's just bad practice. Now, in addition to making sure you have an offset in model space, you want to go to a layout as well. Here's an example layout at 20 scale. And you'll notice once the line weights are applied, it's not so much clearance there because it looked like there was in model space because there were no line weights, but here it's too crowded. So be sure to check it in your paper space layout or do a test plot to make sure that that's spacing. And clearly makes a lot more sense to do that with your first spot elevation location than wait till you have them all placed and find out they're all too close and you have to go move all of them again. So be sure to check that, and that will give you a chance to check your line weights and everything else. Now, while we're here, we'll jump back to that next one because you can see the contours here, and there's a couple different types of lines that we use, and some are smooth, some aren't, but you can also see, even though they're all dashed lines, they display completely differently. So let's take a look at our list here. I'm going to jump ahead to number 9 and talk about that because it ties into what we were just talking about, and then we'll come back to the UCS, which kind of relates back to the text and the spot elevations. So what we want to do is go into model space. Couple things. As far as the dash style is concerned, if you go to the format menu or just type line type, remember you can show the details. If it comes up like this and you don't see anything down here, click show details. You want to uncheck paper space, use paper space units for scaling. So then you can experiment with the proper scale factor to make it the size that you want for the 1 foot, the index contours and the 5 foot contours. Remember those 5 foot ones should be a little thicker and a little longer. And you can always set that up, but make sure, I'm not sure how the original drawing is set. That's the first thing. This global scale factor may be in here, but just make sure that this is unchecked. That way, what you see in the model space will look exactly the same in the paper space. Otherwise, you'll get it to work right in the model space, but it won't look right in the paper space and vice versa. Okay, and the second thing is, for making contours, it's fine to use splines if you want to. They actually do give you pretty nice control, and I think you can check that if you go into properties. You can see that this is a spline, and if you want to edit that, then you can, move these around. Now, sometimes you feel like you don't have much control over getting it. If I wanted to, let's say I wanted to make a swale out of this, it's just not letting me do it right, and I pull this in, it's starting to, but probably what I want to be able to do is hover here, add a fit point, and then pull this up, hover over here, add a fit point, pull that up, and now I can start getting a little better control, a little more rounded shape. Usually I try and locate these kind of symmetrical on either side of the center line. That gives you a more symmetrical curve and a little better control. The spline control point is kind of effective. It pulls this off, then come back here, add another fit point, say, okay, well, I really need that to pull back up into there, because it will shift beyond, the more than just closely adjacent to the fit point that you're moving. Okay, now one of the things about a spline, it's not really an issue for contours, but if you have a center line like this, and that's a spline, and you look in the properties, there's no length, and you want to make sure you know the length, as I mentioned before, to make sure that the spacing is proper and all that kind of stuff. So for a polyline, if you have a polyline, you can come down here. Okay, let's pick one of these. Oh, that's a spline too. There's a polyline. So it does have a length category in here. So if you use polylines, it's fine. Just make sure that you check the length in the properties. If you use splines, what you need to do is select the spline and type list. It just pulls up a list that gives control points, which are listed in the properties, but up here it also gives the length of that. And I think that will be based on the unit accuracy that you have set in the unit. So if I round this off the nearest inch, it will round that off as well. Okay. Now, the other problem you see here is whether you're using Splines tend to display the line dashes, the line type pretty accurately, but if you use polylines, you get some of this kind of stuff. And the way to fix that is to go to the properties. Remember, we mentioned this on the very bottom. It says line type generation. You need to make sure that's enabled. As soon as you do that, you get nice, smooth lines. If you want to curve a polyline, you can right click, go to polyline edit, or just say spline fit or curve fit. And then, it gives you a way to kind of manipulate that. But again, it's probably better control really if you use splines. And at some point, for whatever reason, if you want to take it into SketchUp, you can always convert splines to polylines now in AutoCAD. So I would encourage you just to work with the splines to make sure that's done. But make sure if you use polygons, you set the line type generation to enabled, and that will take care of that weird spacing that sometimes happens along those lines. You shouldn't have that problem with splines. Okay, so cover contours. I'll get to the path array in a second. Let's go back to the UCS. This is, again, kind of an optional thing. It's not necessary, but we'll take a look at the original base drawing since the building and the site is kind of at an angle. If you're going to start putting text in, text always wants to be horizontal, right? That's the way AutoCAD places it in there. But we can solve that problem just by rotating the UCS. So let's go back to model space here. So if I start typing text in here, well, I don't know where that disappeared to, but anyway, you can see that just like this, all the text is going to end up horizontal, but maybe that's not the best way to orient your spot elevations, that they should be parallel to the building, one either this way or this way, to make sure they read consistently to the bottom or to the right. So instead of, you could take this text and just rotate it, or your block and rotate it, but then it has to, you have to change that around. So you can also solve that problem just by going to the tools menu. And again, if your menus aren't showing, you can click up here and say show menu bar. And I'll give you the command for this too. If you just type UCS actually, I think it defaults to the 3-point option. And if I click on that, the first thing it says specify a new origin point. I'm going to turn my O snaps on, and I'm going to define the x-axis. You can see right there, which normally is horizontal across the screen. So I'm going to zoom in, define that, then zoom up here, y-axis, and now you can just see it just rotated my plan. So now when I start putting text in, everything lines up, and then I can just rotate it back when I'm ready to plot it. Now, so this doesn't really rotate anything physically, it just changes the view of it, the coordinate system, the way it's displayed on the screen. Now, what you also noticed when I did that, let's turn it back here, it automatically rotated it. I didn't have to do anything. And that's because if you type in UCS man for manager, in the settings tab, I already have this update view to plan when UCS is changed. And I don't think we talked about that last semester. We did talk about typing plan. So if I uncheck that and I do a just plain UCS, I specify my origin, there, nothing happens. If I type plan, say current UCS, then it'll rotate around. So I find it helpful to go into the UCS manager. I just set that. There's reasons you might want to rotate the cursor without rotating the view, but if you're doing this, you want them both happening at the same time. So by going to settings, choose update view to plan when UCS is changed, then you don't have to type an extra command. You just go in and do UCS, specify the origin, X direction, Y direction, and it's done. Okay? So that can be just helpful for placing your spot elevations. And then finally, the path array. This actually makes it really easy to locate your contours along your swale center lines, which was, by hand, you've got to kind of measure around those things, right? Kind of crawl around the corners, work your scale around there. Much easier in AutoCAD using path array. So the first thing you want to do, and there actually is an offset option, but it kind of offsets it up here, and I just recommend calculating the first distance and drawing a tick mark, a mark across your center line. So you know, whatever slope this is, figure out, and whatever your high point swale elevation is, figure out what's that first distance. That's always the first step you do anyway. Measure that out, draw a line that distance, and then draw this little tick or hash mark across that at that point. So mark that first distance to the first even contour. The path array then will locate all the other even 1 foot contours. So if I come in here now and go to array and choose path array, it'll say select objects, just that one, hit enter, select the path, and you can see it automatically put that in a spacing. Now, right now up here, if you look at the top, it's at 11 1/16 of an inch. So if I make this 15 feet, now you can see that it's from that point, it's 15, 15, 15. So I don't know what the spacing is here. It looks like that should be maybe a little bigger spacing than that. But at any rate, it'll set that even increment up, and then you can use that to just snap your contour splines or polylines to those points. So that gives you a really nice way to check that. Okay, so that's, I think, my last tip that's in there. That'll help you line up the contours, mark that out. So keep these things in mind. Hopefully this movie will come through a little better than the last one, and I'll see you in class tomorrow. If you have questions on that, I'm happy to help you with those things as well. All right.